So if you're on the hunt for a new job, there's a new twist in the hiring process: artificial intelligence. This morning, Money Watch posted an article highlighting the new trend.
Major companies like Ikea are now turning to AI programs to screen for suitable applicants and predict future job performance. But the technique is facing criticism. So let's bring in Alan Butler to explain. He's the general counsel at the Electronic Privacy Information Center. So AI is already being used when it comes to reviewing resumes. How is this any different?
Well, what we're looking at now is a lot different than a computer simply reviewing text on a page. These new systems are increasingly using facial recognition and sort of face recognition technologies. So they're actually evaluating physical characteristics of the applicants, but they're doing so in a way that's not transparent or explainable, and that may be unfair or biased against applicants.
You know, when I hear AI, I know that people think like unbiased technology, it's just a machine at work, but these ones and zeros, they're written by human beings, and that's always the problem here, that there's often an inherent bias based on the person that put together said program. And so I'm wondering if the federal government has become concerned. There's no sort of oversight from anyone, I guess, other than the companies.
You're correct that we currently don't have any federal agency that directly oversees the use of AI. Obviously, the Labor Department oversees hiring practices, but I think individuals within the U.S. and other governments, including in Europe, are increasingly concerned about the use of AI in these different contexts. And as you noted, there is a major concern about potential bias, both in the design of the systems and also in the way that the systems are trained, because if the systems are trained on data that is itself has baked in inherent bias, right, then the outcomes could be biased as well.
So listen, Alan, can you just give us, because I want to understand exactly how it's being used. Can you give us kind of like a real life example? Like, I'm applying for a job and I hand in my resume, and then where does it go from there?
Well, the system that Epic highlighted in our complaint to the Federal Trade Commission called HireView was actually a system that was a remote video interview system. So in that situation, you apply for a job and you're directed to conduct a remote video interview via your computer or an app. So you're actually recorded in answering several questions. And that recording is then analyzed by the AI system, and they look for facial traits and other traits to evaluate the applicant. And that actually makes up more than 50% of the score in many cases.
Whoa. Wow. You can see how that can become a problem.
For sure. So how are critics responding?
Well, Epic and others have banded together to highlight the need for greater transparency and accountability in the use of these systems. As I mentioned, we filed a complaint concerning the HireView system specifically in the U.S., but more broadly on the international level, there's already been the development of proposed frameworks for regulating AI, including in Europe, and a framework in the OECD, as well as the universal guidelines for AI. And the purpose of these frameworks is to draw attention to the need for robustness, transparency, accountability, and fairness in the use of these algorithms.
So those in favor of these algorithms, though, in these programs, they say, you know, this is actually going to protect against bias, right? Because it's an algorithm that's sorting out the candidate most likely to succeed, and not just to succeed in terms of getting through the process, but also to succeed at the job.
Right, and that's why those that are advocating for greater accountability in this space are calling for the requirement of assessments that be conducted before these systems are deployed, right, so that those claims about bias can actually be evaluated and there be a transparent way to understand how these decisions are made.
So here's another question. How can we be sure that the algorithm that a human programs is in fact going to work without prejudice?
Right. I think that's exactly the reason why we need these assessments, why we need the oversight of these systems, because otherwise there's really no way to establish that these predictions or that the claims are true.
So can the technology indeed predict who's going to be successful at the job?
I think as far as we've seen right now, we don't have any evidence to believe that it can accurately predict that. I mean, it's on the companies that develop them to provide evidence that that's true.
Mm-hmm. And with every advance in technology, of course, comes the potential for hacking. There are even videos on YouTube explaining how candidates can ace these pre-recorded interviews. So how can a company be sure their AI program is actually working and not being duped?
Wow.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a concern about the robustness of these systems, as you noted, and there's really kind of two different concerns. One is that there may be ways to kind of circumvent the systems, which may not matter as much in hiring, but if you're talking about autonomous vehicles, it could be a real safety problem. And then the second issue is the actual data that's being collected and whether that's secure.
And then there's sort of that one final question that has to do with privacy, because they're not just getting sort of your name, your address, your social security number. They're getting more intimate information about you. I presume that part of the process is going to ask you things like, you know, in 5 years, what are your dreams, or whatever the wacky questions that, you know, you get asked when you're in a job interview. So what about all that information? That could be valuable.
Yes, many of these systems involve the collection of very sensitive personal information that itself needs to be protected. And that's another reason why we need a comprehensive privacy law in the United States to address the collection of this type of data.
Yeah.
All right, Alan Butler, really good information. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
And for the full article, just visit our website at cbsnews.com.